Hello guys, welcome to another video. This video is going to be about the top 5 questions in chess. Now, chess is a complicated game, and in order to understand complicated things, humans need frameworks. They need things to guide them. And that's the purpose that questions serve. Oftentimes, if you start by asking the right question about a position, you can come to the right answer. Whereas if you just try to blindly calculate, it might be a lot harder to come towards that good move. So these 5 questions are the questions I think that are used the most frequently and are the most important. And I put them in order. So the first one is, what are the drawbacks of this move? And this one is key and central to chess. Drawbacks are ingrained in chess. There's no way around it. Every move undefends squares, and every move moves a piece to a square where it could become a target. So those are the 2 main drawbacks that we're looking for. Can we pounce on those squares that are undefended? Can we attack that piece that is now maybe a target? And this goes for both our opponent's pieces and our pieces. So moving on to 2, what does the opponent threaten or want? And this one, perhaps the most important and most undervalued question, because if you don't see the threat, then you cannot stop it. And if you cannot stop the threat, then generally you lose. So asking this question, essentially every single move, is, in my opinion, like mandatory, where you need to know what your opponent wants at all times. And 3, if I could place my piece anywhere, where would it be? So this one, I think this one is really useful in determining where to focus energy and attention. So let's imagine we have 2 pieces. One piece has an obvious place that it would love to be. It's generating a lot of threats on that ideal square. It's amazing. The other piece, if I could put it anywhere on the board, it still wouldn't be great, right? You know, I might improve it very marginally, but it's not going to be a big improvement. And if we have a piece like that, we don't want to invest a bunch of energy moving that piece over and over and over again, because we're not going to get yield off our investment, right? There's not an obvious destination square. So this question helps us direct our efforts in an efficient way. It helps us focus the attention on pieces that could really use that attention, and not focus on pieces that don't have that obvious square where it might want to go to. So the 4th one is kind of more of a defensive one, and it can also be used aggressively, but generally when you're the side with space, you're the side with a good pawn structure, you're not necessarily interested in changing it because you're experiencing benefits from it. So generally the side that's a little cramped, that feels like they're defending, generally that side is the side that wants to change the status quo. And like Axel Smith said, no pawn break, no plan, right? You always need to know where are the pawn breaks in the position, because that's how we activate our pieces, with pawn breaks. And it's important to know that this question, how can I change a structure such where the pawn breaks, it's important not only from a pawn break standpoint, but also from a capture standpoint. Like, we can use captures and recaptures to change a structure as well, and this is very useful defensive idea. So number 5. How can I generate the largest threat possible? This one is an attacking idea, and it's a good guide because it keeps your foot on the gas pedal. Oftentimes it can be tempting to take a timeout and grab material, and before you do that, sometimes it's good to grab material, but before you grab material, it's useful to ask this question. Can I keep generating threats? Can I generate an even bigger threat before I grab the material? So what we're going to do is we're going to look at a game that I played against a candidate master, and we're going to use this game to talk about our 5 questions. So we played the Sicilian, and our opponent lets us get this Maroczy bind setup. And the Maroczy bind setup is good because it controls space. So already we should be thinking about two main questions. What are the drawbacks of this move? For white, the drawbacks are the king is a little open, and the dark squares are a little weak. And we should also be thinking about where are the pawn breaks. So for white is doing great. White doesn't need a pawn break because white has space. White has the better structure. Black does need a pawn break because black has a lot less space for their pieces. So where are those pawn breaks? There's a pawn break with a6, b5, and there's a pawn break with e6, d5. If it were me, let's get a few more moves. I would try to play for e6 as soon as possible. So knight c6 is good. Here, I would try to play e6, and let's say castle's the most common move, d5. And we can already see, if we look at the scores here, black is doing much better than they were doing in these positions because they're changing the structure and they're bringing the attack to white and they're exploiting the drawbacks. Like let's say we trade a bunch in the center, just to give you an idea of what I mean. So we talked about the drawbacks. The drawbacks of f3 were that it weakened the king along this diagonal and the dark squares. And we can see that here now that the structure's changed because the center is no longer covering these weaknesses, it's no longer hiding them. And now, this bishop being loose to this tempo and this pressure on this knight is starting to become quite unpleasant. So as black, that's what I'm thinking. How can I change the structure? My opponent played this move, bishop d7. I'm not a huge fan of bishop d7. I think that black needs to take a more aggressive approach towards changing the structure, but that's fine. So they rook c8. What's the threat? Threat's probably knight e5. So just defend. a6. What is the idea? What does my opponent want with a6? Okay. There's really two ideas. One idea is to stop knight b5, and the other idea is they want to play b5, chipping at the center. They want to change the structure, right? We talked about how if your position is cramped or worse, you want to change the structure. So I don't want them to change the structure, so I play a4. And my opponent plays knight b4. So every move has a drawback, right? This move leaves the knight on an undefended square where it can be targeted and questioned, right? He's trying to take advantage of the drawback of my move, which is that this square is now a hole, but his move also has a drawback. So we attack the knight. We try to go forward. We attack the knight. He defends the knight. And every move has a drawback, right? The drawback of this move is the b5 square is now huge, unoccupied piece, unoccupied place for my pieces. And let's talk about question number 3. If I could put my pieces anywhere, where would they be? So obviously, the knights have these amazing squares here. If we look for other squares on the board, aside from the b6 square, there's nowhere else that the knights would want to be, right? Pretty much all these king-size squares, there's no future prospects for the knights, so the knights are optimized, looking towards these amazing weak center squares that are intersection squares of these pawns. Our rook, this rook is good. This rook is pretty bad. Could be better on the d file. This bishop, right? Not only can this bishop not really move anywhere, I don't really want to lose a bishop for free, but even if I can put the bishop anywhere I want, there's no place that it wants to be, right? Even on b5, it doesn't do anything extra on b5, and it's useful in defending this pawn. So this bishop is optimized, even though it looks a little passive. This bishop, same thing. This bishop has huge influence on the king side and the queen side, but this one does kind of have a destination square where it might want to go to b6 in the future. Like, let's say a tactic like knight here, followed by bishop there, and then the a5 pawn drops. So this bishop could have a destination square. I just keep it simple, right? We talked about how this rook could be improved, so I improve it. Okay, and our opponent gets off the file. They don't want their queen lined up with my rook. But every move has a drawback, right? What is the drawback of queen e8? The drawback is that these two squares are not defended anymore. And this idea that we had a while ago, ever since they played a6, they created this weakness. But it wasn't really possible to exploit the weakness until now. This square is open and it comes with a threat. So I play knight b5, right? We want to go forward, use the weak squares, and connect with our ideas. And the opponent plays bishop c6, not addressing bishop b6, and we go in. Opponent attacks my bishop. I win their pawn with a threat, and they play knight here, knight a6. So let's go back to our questions and ask, is there a threat, right? And there is a threat. The opponent wants to play b6. And it's possible that after b6 we might have some shenanigans with knight here, but even then they could just take, and they got two pieces for a rook. So what we want to do is we want to have a convenient response to b6. So we move forward, right? We give our bishop space so that it can run away. And our opponent goes forward with the knight. So let's think about where to put our queen, right? Whenever my queen is attacked, literally whenever my queen is attacked, the first question that I ask myself is, like, okay, do I have to move it? And if I have to move it, where can it go that can't really be attacked? Because the queen is it's a magnet for tempos. So we don't really want to go here from that perspective because it's opposite the rook. And we do have this restriction to guard the b2 pawn. So with that logic, okay, there's two options, right? And let's try to apply our other questions to figure out which one of these is better. Because it's not super obvious, and if you're just looking at square control, you're like, okay, queen a3, it controls more squares. So let's look at queen a3. So what does the opponent want to do, right? Well, we talked about how they want to change the structure. Here, from their perspective, I have a threat, right? b4, knight here is necessary. But how can they generate pressure on my position? They need to change the structure, right? This is a huge defensive idea. And the best way to change the structure is f5. So f5 loosens the knight if I take and opens up their rook and gives some space for their queen. Now from that perspective, if we know that f5 is the best move, and indeed it is, we should take that in mind and keep ourselves opposite their king, right? We wanna try to reduce our opponent's counterplay. There's still no forward moves, so my opponent, he doesn't care, right? He doesn't care that my queen's still lined up, that I'm discouraging f5. He tries to play it anyway. Okay. And now we want to exploit the drawbacks of this move, right? He just opened up his king. So in order for this to be a problem for him, a couple things need to happen. This pawn needs to move, and this knight needs to move. So in order for this pawn to move, this knight's got to go. So I kick the knight. And now, right, when we're attacking, we want to create the biggest threat possible, right? And there's two threats. I like this one, just opening up the queen. The engine likes this one, hitting this punch, and this punch. But this one, you can see the opponent doesn't even need to react. Stockfish is saying best is to play aggressively. So I'm just looking to create the biggest threat possible. So I play c5, just trying to open up. Now, for example, if I was to illustrate what are the threats, so this move is a threat. This move is a threat, and just taking and this move is a threat. Taking followed by knight takes is a very big threat. So right, this move creates a lot of options. There's a lot of options still in the position for me. I'm just trying to generate as many threats as possible, and my opponent is eventually not going to be able to cope. Let's see what they try. So they take our knight. Right, we still have this tension, so we're still generating all these same threats. We could take with the bishop, but if we take with the bishop, queen here, now this knight is protected, right? So we want to have forceful moves that are not easy to defend against, right? So even though this creates a smaller threat, it's harder to cope with because there's no convenient response. This response just loses, right? So I take the bishop with the knight. Again, with the pawn, I'm just trying to create as many threats as possible, and they take my e4 pawn. Okay, that's a free knight. You know, we don't ask questions, just take free knights. And again, you know, we could try to calculate all these complicated things, but we still have our threats, right? Our opponent's gonna have to deal with our threats at some point. We have two threats. We have knight c7, and we have pawn takes b7. So deal with my two threats, please. And he plays king h8, and this is, I think it's the best move, right? You cannot take this pawn, because if you take this pawn, knight c7 is hitting, and like this is massive trouble. You're just losing all your pieces. So he plays king out of the way. We look to go forward. We look to make threats here. And again, we just want to be as simple as possible. We push our pawn. We have these connected pass pawns, and we're feeling great. So here is the final moment of the game that is really noteworthy. I'll give you a second to think about what you would do in this position. So first things first, right? We talked about literally one of the most important questions that we have to ask is, what does the opponent want? The opponent actually wants a decent amount. They want to shatter our king safety, and they want to take this pawn, right? And the engine is saying, well, we can create a bigger threat if they take this doesn't change, because they can't go here, because then we trade the queens and we win. And if they go here, their only other move we're going here and we're also winning. Say here, 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 here. There's no time to attack our king because you're just losing on the queen side. So I didn't want to play that way. I just wanted to play it a simple way. I played the second best move. Second best move, just take this knight. Right, the knight is generating a lot of threats. This rook is not doing a whole lot, so just get rid of the knight, and there's no more threats, right? Like, you're gonna have to cope with this, and you're not gonna be able to. So opponent tries. I play this cute move, bishop b6, just trying to trade off the pieces. The more pieces that are traded off, the more evident these pawns are going to become, and the harder they're going to be to stop. So this is a nice move, because if you take, I take with check, and you lose. So he took, and I'm able to go knight here, and knight takes, and knight here, and the game's over, right? You know, I'm going to go here and here. I have knight f6 on tap, plus I'm up 2 pieces. And remember, black is a master, right? You know, black is 2,500. Black is not a fool. So these are my 5 questions. I'm going to have a upcoming series with 5 questions for attacking and 5 questions for defending. I hope you guys enjoyed that. And if you have any suggestions, any questions that you like, you can leave a comment. Thank you.